everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, What Influences Our Career Journeys. My name is Jennifer Grazel, and I lead the financial services vertical at LinkedIn. We're very excited to share and discuss key findings from today's Professional Women's Report that Citi and LinkedIn are releasing. Specifically, we want to understand the factors that have influenced our career journeys and some of the gender differences revealed. There are many interesting findings that we'll discuss today with this esteemed panel of experts. But before we get into the webinar, I have just a few housekeeping items. The webinar will last about 60 minutes, including 10 minutes at the end for webinar questions from all of you. Also, your phone lines are muted by default, but you can use the Q&A box on the right of your screen to ask any questions, and we'll be answering questions at the end. After the webinar, you'll receive an email with a link to the PowerPoint deck, the research white paper, and a recording of the webinar, so you can review any slides and re-watch the webinar at your own leisure. Also, for those of you on Twitter, feel free to follow us at LinkedIn Marketing, where you can also send any questions about the research. So feel free to join this conversation on Twitter. So let's get right into today's webinar. We're extremely fortunate to have this esteemed panel of professional women who have deep insight and practice supporting the advancement of women. Kathy McManus, SVP of Content and Social at Citi, will be leading this webinar, unveiling key findings, and moderating the discussion around these insights. Kathy is joined by Kathy Caprino, a career success coach, author, and contributor to Forbes, Victoria Pynchon, acclaimed author and co-founder of SheNegotiates.com training and consulting, and last but not least, Nancy Joyce, a business executive and expert in teaching women the art of self-promotion. So to kick things off, I'm going to hand it over to Kathy McManus to take us through the research.
Thank you so much, Jen. We are so thrilled to have all of you joining us this morning for a discussion that we have been looking forward to having since we first caught a glimpse of this round of Citi's research with LinkedIn. And we'll be sharing more resources with you to continue to explore these topics after the chat. But if you'd like to join the conversation on Twitter as we talk today, as Jen mentioned, please tweet using the ProfWomen hashtag, which you see at the bottom of all of our slides here today, and mention at Citibank and at LinkedIn to follow the conversation. Before we begin, I just wanted to give everyone a little background on the research itself, which is actually now in its 5th wave. The Today's Professional Woman Report was actually inspired by conversations overheard on the Connect Professional Women's Network, a community for women that Citi launched in collaboration with LinkedIn in early 2012. And we released our first study in October of that year, just a few months after Anne-Marie Slaughter's now famous essay on Having It All appeared in The Atlantic. And much of the conversation that we heard in the group after that essay, which defined having it all by having a family and career success, really revolved around how women were really defining success. And many disagreed with the premise behind the article, so we began a research study to find out what professional women were really thinking about this and all the other areas that were top of mind for them professionally and financially. So if you look on the slide here that we have up on the screen right now on the left, in our first study in October 2012, we explored this notion of having it all and learned that many women didn't define success by marriage, kids, or reaching the epitome of their career. And the vast majority felt that success, as they defined it, was achievable. And then fast forward to early 2013 in May when Lean In first hit store shelves and the conversation turned to women in leadership. And we took women's pulse on what they felt were the roadblocks standing in the way of reaching the upper corporate ranks. We learned that it wasn't a glass ceiling or family obligations that were holding them back. It was often their own self-confidence standing in the way. Later that year, we realized it's wonderful to have all these insights from women, but what about men? So we asked male LinkedIn members the same set of questions that we were asking women, and no surprise, their answers were very different. Their notion of success, of having it all in particular, was much more traditional, meaning they placed a lot more emphasis on marriage and kids than women. And finally, just 6 months ago, if you look on the right-hand side of the screen, in June 2014, we released Wave 4 of this report, where we took a look at how men and women were defining career progress, happiness, and their career peaks, and learned that all three were really a moving target. So here we are, on to Wave 5 of this report, and the conversations overheard in the Connect group and its 370,000 members gave us no shortage of issues to explore this time around. So today we're going to be covering 3 key topics. First, the people and experiences that shape our career dreams and the paths that we end up taking. There's been a lot of talk lately about how we can do a better job empowering girls with the tools and messages that they need to excel and to follow their dreams. So we're going to be taking a look back to see who and what today's professionals, both men and women, felt influenced their careers the most. We're also going to take a look at how we promote and talk about our achievements at work. And this is a perpetually hot topic on Connect this year. And every time we started a discussion or published a piece of content on Women & Co., Citi's personal finance website for women on this topic, we saw a tremendous response from members and readers looking for ways to enhance their presence at the office and call attention to their accomplishments without it coming across as bragging. And lastly, we'll also talk about work-life balance. Now, whether we call it balance, integration, a work-life mashup, or something else, nearly everyone that we've spoken with has had something to say about how they make it work. But what we learned this time around is that while everyone may be facing challenges when it comes to the daily balance of work and personal or family life, not everyone is talking about it necessarily. So with that said, let's get right into those work-life balance findings and start our discussion. So what we're looking at right now on the screen is the first set of results that we'll be talking about today. Results of the study that we just released a couple of hours ago this morning, hot off the presses, revealed that while both men and women rank finding the right balance between work and family life as their top career concern, we found that men may not be opening up about these challenges to women. 78% of women surveyed reported that they had never heard a successful man talk about the difficulty of having a career and a family. Yet, over half of men said that they have heard other men engage in these conversations about work-life balance, which begs the question, are men not opening up to women about these issues? Or are we simply not asking men the question? And the latter was something that was very much discussed last week, as some of you may have seen in light of Jennifer Garner's comments. She talked about how she's often asked about work-life balance in media interviews as the mom of 3. But for her husband, the question of balancing an acting career and being the dad of 3 is almost never raised. So we'll talk further about this in a minute, but first let's also take a look at what happens when a successful woman talks about the challenges of balancing a career and parenthood. Most women over 35 say they feel relieved to hear someone open up about their work-life balance issues. Yet the majority of millennial women reported feeling angry, disillusioned, or motivated to make a change, with 16% reporting that this type of dialogue makes them not want to pursue a leadership role for themselves. So I'm going to pause here and I'm going to open it up to Kathy Caprino, one of our panelists, to weigh in. Because Kathy, you've talked a great deal about work-life balance in your work as a career coach and have been very vocal about your own issues juggling career and family life. What are you hearing from men in particular, and do these results surprise you? And then the second part of that question is, in light of the effects that this conversation has on younger women, how do we address these issues honestly without discouraging a generation of women from pursuing leadership roles?
Oh, these are fantastic questions, Catherine. Thank you. So let me share my take, and do know that I work mostly with women. I've worked with over 10,000 women in 10 years, but here's my take. I do think men struggle with balance, but not at all in the same way as women. Studies show, and my work with women show, that women are still doing 75% of the domestic work, even when they're primary breadwinners. So these challenges about balance, I feel, are not at all the same between men and women. And, I don't think they will be the same for a long period of time. So women process these balance issues differently. They have different expectations, different boundaries, different emotions. So even if men and women are talking about balance issues, they're not talking about them in the same way. They don't mean the same thing. I mean, I always love to say women are not men in skirts. It's important to remember that we're very different. So the second piece is communication. I mean, I've found that men don't tend to openly discuss their struggles. And I was surprised, truthfully, that it says that men do talk about it with men, but not women haven't heard that. I feel, the communication research says that when men communicate, there's more of a hierarchical kind of structure to it. They're talking more about one-upping in what they communicate. So I feel like we're not going to hear it from men, and I think that's a wonderful point. When have you ever heard a male leader ask the question, can you have it all? So kind of to come full circle, I've been really vocal about this issue. Should we be talking about can you have it all? I think it's the wrong question. I think it's absolutely the wrong question in the media, and I'd love to see it banned. When we hear top female leaders over and over sharing what they've had to give up to get where they are, I think it's backfiring. It's demotivating. It's demoralizing. It's demoralizing to me, and I'm 54. It's really having a negative impact on young women. So I don't think we want to lie or withhold. Of course we don't. But I think we have to stop asking what I feel is a ridiculous question, can you have it all? The better way to look at it is, what matters most to you? What are your non-negotiables? What are your life priorities? What will you give up everything for? What is success on your terms? And then live from that knowledge every day. It's not easy, but if we're only talking about what we're giving up, then I think, and if that's all we're hearing from female leaders, something's not right. Either the price has been too great, or we're just focusing on the wrong thing, the wrong message.
So I feel like, Kathy, thank you for that insight. That provides a perfect segue into our next finding, because you're talking a lot about priorities and what matters most. And this was another area that we explored in relation to work-life balance. We all agree, making time and prioritizing both work and family life and personal time are of utmost importance. But let's take a closer look at how important those factors are when it comes down to what we actually earn. And so we're calling this the balanced salary tipping point. When asked if our respondents would rather receive a salary increase or flexibility benefits that allow them to achieve a better sense of work-life balance, most professionals would choose the balance, would choose the perks, until the raise offered exceeds 20%. Above 20%, most men and women would take the money over the work-life benefits. So now I'm going to turn this over to Victoria, because, Victoria, you shared a lot of advice within the Connect group on how to ask for a raise or negotiate for the flexibility or the perks that you want. So do you feel like this raise balance issue is always an either-or situation? And is it possible to ask for both? Victoria?
What? Hello?
Yes.
Am I on?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you are.
Okay, so that's a fascinating percentage, because that is the wage gap. So that means that if we could close the wage gap for women, they would happily ask for a raise, because what your research shows is that they choose work-life balance until the raise offered exceeds 20%. So the question for everyone on the line is whether or not you're going to wait for a raise to be offered to you, or you're going to negotiate the raise. The primary problem for all of us is that we're circling the drain, all of us, of the wage gap. So when we talk to our women friends, we feel like we're doing pretty well. Probably most women on the line are doing pretty well. They're engaged employees. That means they do something more, anything more than they're asked to do. So being on this conversation means you're engaged. This is the year 2014 when employers are being told to do anything they can to keep their engaged employees. That means this year is the year to ask for a raise. It's hard, it's difficult, and let me tell you that I have both men and women clients in my consulting practice. And what I've found for the individuals who call me to use my services is that men are just as afraid that they're going to be told no or that they're going to be fired because they have asked for more money. 100% of the people I have consulted with have not been fired. So no one gets fired because they ask for a raise, particularly not engaged employees. So this slide says, okay, ladies, it's time to ask for a raise. There is a way to do it without gender blowback, and that is simply to lead with your benefit. Talk first about what it is you're doing. Maybe take a look at the job duties that you actually have, compare it to what your original job description was, and you're going to see that you deserve a promotion and a raise. And so talk about what your loyalty is to your employer, and also what you've been delivering, what your market value is, and get that raise that you deserve.
Great advice, Victoria. Thank you. So now we are all motivated to go ask for that raise. Let's take a turn and take a look at, what actually you need to do within the workplace to set yourself up for asking for that raise or negotiating for what you want. And we've all talked about this. A lot of it has to do with your perceived value in the workplace, as you just suggested. So let's turn the discussion now to the notion of self-promotion, which, as we mentioned earlier, has been one of the hottest topics in the Connect group this year. And now, contrary to a lot of the discussions that we overheard and many of the research studies that some of our panelists today on the call have actually reported on, our survey actually found that women were slightly more likely than men to say that they share news of professional accomplishments at work. 30% of women say they regularly call attention to their own or their team's accomplishments, while only 26% of men said that they did. However, women are also more likely to say that they don't promote their accomplishments enough. Only 40% of women feel that they are adequately promoting their work to senior members of their organizations, compared to 50% of men who feel that they're doing a good job of self-promotion. So they say that they're doing more, but they still don't feel like they're doing enough. And further, women are also more likely than men to view most behavior related to sharing news of professional accomplishments at work as a necessary part of self-promotion, while men are more likely to view some of these behaviors, like forwarding complimentary emails about their work to their boss, or nominating themselves for industry awards, or posting about work accomplishments to social media. They're more likely to view those behaviors as bragging. So Nancy, I'm going to turn this over to you now, because you have spoken and written extensively about the need for women to promote their accomplishments at work more often. And so did this fact that women are saying that they regularly self-promote surprise you like it did with us? And why do you think that they feel that they're still not doing enough?
Catherine, I think, first of all, I was very interested and excited when I saw the findings, because on one hand, I thought one of the things that's really positive about these results is it shows an awareness among women about the need to self-promote that we haven't seen in a long time. And so that was very exciting to me. I think what's interesting, we're all kind of puzzled around this, what seems like a disconnect, that on one hand, women seem to be self-promoting more according to the results of the survey, and yet men say they're doing a better job. Women feel like they need to do more. And I think the disconnect here is in a little bit in the approach, in that men for generations have been trained, if you want to use that word, or intuitively know how to share their accomplishments at work with other men or with women. And their approach is a little bit more process-oriented and a little bit more subtle, if that's the right word. And this is what I mean by that. When we go, as advisors, we go into companies and we do research. We ask people how much time they spend with their managers or their manager's manager, and we ask people how often they ask for feedback or how much they speak up at meetings. And what we find is that the women are likely to share the result of a project, for example, like supporting a complimentary email or maybe nominating themselves for an award. But a guy might, during the process of that project, share the little wins, stop into the boss's office and say, hey, we got over that negotiation barrier, or we were able to get this client on board for the next phase of the project. And so they're keeping people up to speed on a daily and weekly basis, in person, by email. And so bringing people along, so by the time the big event happens at the end, people are already on board and they may not feel the need to do the larger announcement that we see here that they may perceive as bragging. And they don't necessarily even realize that what they're doing all along is self-promotion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's interesting because, when we talk about, the end goal of all this self-promotion, what is it, what are we trying to achieve? A lot of it is, earning that salary increase or some sort of promotion. So, the next question that we asked was, how do professionals actually feel about what they're earning? And what we found is that regardless of what they're doing to promote themselves, nearly 3 out of 4 professionals feel that they're not getting paid enough. Men, on average, felt that they should be making 29% more than their current salary, and women felt that they're worth 27% more. So, Victoria, these numbers probably look, again, very familiar to you and are all around the same range that we talked about just a few moments ago. How you've given us a few negotiation tips, but how do you go in there and ask for what you think that you're actually worth and make sure that you get it?
The key 2 words are market value. And if you talk about what your market value is instead of what you deserve to be paid, you don't get that blowback that you're greedy or that you're asking for money. And again, let me say that the men I consult with also hear from their employers, we're not just about money here. We're about the organization. In fact, I just had this call with an investment banker yesterday. And what is an investment bank about? It is only about money. And yet, when he was negotiating the raise he was told he would get if he met certain metrics, there was pushback from the CEO who said, we're not all about money. And so he started the conversation that my client started the conversation with the CEO that my client and I had discussed, which is, talk about how enthusiastic you are about being a member of the team, what you've given to the employer, what results you've produced, and you are going to hear no. And I think that the main difference between men and women is that women will be more likely, not always, this isn't a truism always, but women are more likely to be stopped by the word no. So negotiators say that no is really just the beginning of the negotiation because it means you have problem-solving work to do, and if you can talk with your superior about your wages not meeting market value being a mutual problem for yourself and the organization, then you can turn this conversation around and make it simply that, a conversation about how to move up your salary so that it's competitive in the marketplace and so that you will be more incentivized to be even more on board, even more enthusiastic about your shared mission, with your employer. And you can see everybody thinks they're not being paid enough.
Yeah. And so we're talking, really, as we talked about before, is really elevating the conversation. It's not just about you. It's about, the contributions that you can bring to the company and really to the big picture, and taking that discussion, taking that ask to the next level. So excellent advice. And now, what we're going to turn to is thinking about, all of these factors, from how much we earn to how we balance our work and life priorities, really affects the trajectory of our careers. So let's now take a step back to the beginning. And we're going to turn the conversation to our childhoods, which is where we started off today, and really look at, simple question: what did everyone want to be when they grew up? So from our survey respondents, education topped the list of childhood dream jobs for women, whereas high tech topped the list for men. And only 2% of women, which we thought was interesting, dreamed of entering the technology field as a child, which is a stat that has relatively stayed consistent over time. And what's more, we also found that men are more likely than women to have followed their childhood dreams. 54% of men felt that their profession is related to what they wanted to do as a child versus 47% of women, which is actually very consistent with our research from 2013, where we saw that men were much more likely to have a linear career path, with women experiencing many more twists, turns, and transitions along the way. Now I'm going to turn back to Kathy, because you coach women about how to find career fulfillment. And so how do you interpret these results? Because like I said, we found in past research that men tend to have a much more linear path to their career goals, where women's journeys tend to have, a few more curves. Do you see that your clients tend to come full circle? Do they end up following a path similar to what they dreamed about when they were children, or do you see them diverting from those paths?
This data is so interesting to me. So I have some hypotheses about it. To answer your question, first of all, I think why education tops the list for women is this. I think that that's what young girls see most in terms of adult women professionals. They're teachers and they're doctors. And I think that, we're very informed by what we see. So truthfully, if young girls are exposed to more women in tech fields, and being in the media, assuming more diverse roles, I truly think things will change. I think in 10 years this data is going to be different. But in my generation, women weren't asked at an early age, what do you think you might want to do for a living? Whereas I think back then, and I do think even now, I have a 17-year-old son and a 20-year-old daughter, many more people are asking my son, what do you think you want to do? What do you think you want to do? It's something they're, can I even say, pressured to think about. So, I think what this does is shape them to think about what a dream career would be. About career fulfillment, I do think women's journeys tend to be a little more circular, less linear. And some of the factors are, first of all, I've heard from so many women who say bearing and raising children in their 30s and 40s absolutely was a life-changing experience. And I know it was for me. When my kids came into this world, it changed everything about how I looked at my life. So I think that what happens is, what I hear is women who've spent a lot of time crafting a career that they thought would be meaningful when they hit 30, when they hit 40, it all changes for them, and they really do have to reevaluate it. The other thing that I think is interesting is I find that so many people don't really know what they want to do when they're young. They really have no idea. And many women talk to me about their fantasies when they were kids. I wanted to be a dancer, I wanted to be a singer, an actor, a writer, but it wasn't necessarily grounded in ways to apply those talents in real-world business. So I think that what's critical for everyone is to go back. I coach all my clients to do this. Go back to when you were 18. What did you love? What lit you up? What stood you out from everyone else? What made you feel alive? What made you feel special? And look at those talents and gifts And now, whether you're 30, 40, 50, see how you can connect all of those dots to what you were passionate about in a way that's actually going to be, financially rewarding and a realistic way to bring your talents of service to the world. So that's how I think it's best looked at. Make sense?
Yes, and on that note, we are going to continue our journey back and take a look at, when we were children, who was really influencing those dreams. You talked a little bit about, girls being exposed to, their teachers or their doctors at a young age. This is one of, what we thought one of the most fascinating statistics from the study. We actually asked both men and women who influenced your career path the most. And what we found was that regardless of their generation, men were most likely to say that their father had the biggest role in shaping their career path. But for women, their parents' influence has varied from one generation to the next. Millennial women were most influenced by their mothers, Gen X women by their fathers, and baby boomers by a teacher, coach, or guidance counselor, so someone in the educational field. So, and we just, everyone has some sort of experience and some sort of, person in their lives who may have shaped their career path. So I'm going to open it up to, the entire panel now just to, quickly tell us, what generation do you fall under, and whether or not these findings held true for you. So, Victoria, I'm going to put you on the spot first.
Fascinating. Yes, I am a boomer, and I was influenced by teachers and guidance counselors because my mother was a stay-at-home mother. I was raised in the 50s, and my family didn't know anyone who had ever gone to college. My mother wanted me to go to college and advised me to be a teacher, and indeed I wanted to be a teacher when I was a child for just the reason that Kathy said, which was that's what I saw women doing at that time, and it was just about the only thing I saw women doing at that time. And I'll tell you, it's come full circle. My father did influence me to be a lawyer because he went to law school without having attended college in his late 30s and early 40s after he'd left home. And I've done all of these things over the course of my career. I've been a university professor. I've taught law school as an adjunct professor. We teach at She Negotiates. I had a 25-year legal career where I got to be a lawyer in the courtroom, which is very fun and exciting. So, I have had it all, and I agree that I hate that phrase because I think that when it's raised problematically, it's more like, why are women still doing it all? But yeah, this is a fascinating finding, and I'm really interested to hear from Gen X and millennial women about the different influences they had in their lives. This really shows a generation gap.
All right, so Nancy, I'm going to turn it over to you. What's your take on this, and can you share a little bit about your personal influences?
Yeah, sure. So interestingly enough, it's true. I am Gen X, and my dad was definitely the biggest influence on me in my career choices. Not necessarily to do what he did. So he's a financial advisor, but he was very focused on helping me think through, first my education, which, he was the first in his family to go to college, and he was always very focused on my education, making sure that I had the best available opportunities, but then also helping me think through what I wanted to do, regularly telling me, as my mother did, but regularly telling me that I could do whatever I wanted to do. And I remember I wanted to be, honestly, Secretary of State. So of course, I'm glued to the television Sunday nights these days. And I went to Georgetown undergrad and was a Russian major. I was one of the first U.S. normal citizens to meet Gorbachev when he came to the U.S. for the first time. So I actually actively pursued that path, and then decided that the bureaucracy of the State Department was nothing compared to doing business there. So I actually worked for Apple I opened the Apple office in Moscow in the early 90s. So, that set me off on my business career. But
Wow.
And my dad was there every single step of the way, guiding me. And one of the things, part of the reason that I'm actually here this very day is that my dad is an expert in self-promotion, and he would say things to me like, I'd say, "Hey, Dad, I closed this deal today," and he would say, "Does your boss know? Does the CEO know?" And I'd be like, "Dad, the CEO of Apple doesn't know that I closed this deal today." And he said, "Well, I'm sure he'd love to hear that a deal in Russia was closed today. Why don't you send him an email?" And I thought to myself, okay, and you know what? The truth is that the CEO of Apple would love to be able to chat with somebody about the fact that there was a deal closed in Russia that day, because Russia was a brand new market. And so he taught me about, how to gain visibility, and that I had something to say, that actually, that self-promotion was about people getting to know you. That's all it is about. If they don't know you, they can't direct you to the right place. They can't use you in the right way. So I think, it really actually relates back to the research really well, because, women send out an email at the end of the project. Well, maybe another option is to actually deliberately bump into the boss's boss and say, "Hey, I'm so psyched we actually closed this deal today, and we got them to, sign on for 2 years instead of 1, which she's never been able to do before." And when your real objective is, to network with more powerful people in the organization, maybe that's the better option. And that's something that, my dad was relentless about teaching me, and I give him a ton of credit for that.
Fascinating. So he didn't just influence your career path, but really influenced your, the mission, the overall mission of your career, which is tremendous. So, all right. So we're 2 out of 3. So Kathy Caprino, last but not least, let us know, what generation do you fall under, and did the findings hold true for you too?
Yeah. Well, this is so interesting. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
You can hear me. Awesome. So I'm a boomer, and I don't fit this result except in one critical way. So my dad was the one who influenced me. But here's the wild thing. He was a corporate guy, GE for 30 years, 7 patents, and he adored his career. But as I grew up, Dad would leave the same time every day, 6:30 in the morning. He'd come home the same time every day, 6 o'clock. Dinner would be on the table. And that was my view of what a great career would be. And the funny thing is, I was the second child, and in my mind, I was the son he didn't have. So in some ways, I think I had a lot of male characteristics, kind of in the way I communicate, in the way I think, and even the way I self-promote. So maybe I fall into that men from every generation said their father had the biggest role. Really, that was me. The interesting thing, though, is it turns out corporate life really wasn't the best for me. I thought it was, and I assumed working for a Fortune 500 company would be absolutely the way to go. And from the get-go, it was not a good fit for me. And, I'm a singer and a writer, and Dad was a scientist. So I love him to pieces. He's not with us any longer. And my mother used to say, you can do anything you put your mind to. But he somehow, in my mind, downplayed these softer trajectories. What are you going to do as a singer? What are you going to do as a writer? So the influence was to try corporate life, and I tried a little too long. I spent 18 years in it, and I only left after I was laid off after 9/11. And I said, okay, that's it. I am done with this. And I became a marriage and family therapist and a coach and writer, speaker. And I'm so much happier in my own endeavor, my own business. So it was an interesting influence that took me, sadly, in the wrong direction, but we certainly can't blame our parents for that, can we?
No, and it's really fascinating too, because I feel like, with all of the twists and turns and transitions that we've been talking about with women's career paths, there are different influences throughout each stage of our careers. So it would be interesting, perhaps in our next survey, to take a look at, the influences, along the way that have shaped, maybe where we started and where we ended up. But with all that said, I know that I've been seeing a lot of questions come in from our attendees who have been listening in. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jen, who is going to throw out a few of the questions that have come in from listeners to our panelists. Jen, would you like to kick things off?
Sure. Thanks, Kathy. So definitely some really interesting findings. I myself have, experienced some of these, and I do have a personal question, but I'm going to get started with a question that came in around how can you find your market value for your position. Victoria, you had referenced this in your earlier remarks. Maybe you can get started with how to actually find your market value for your current position.
Right. There are online tools, Glassdoor.com, Payscale.com, Salary.com, that will give you information, and some of them walk you through what it is your job title is. And again, remember, look at what you're actually doing now as opposed to what your job title says you're doing. Because of the post-recession period, most people have not received the promotions they deserve, even though they've picked up the duties. For my clients, if it's a particular kind of niche area and they don't fit well into these online resources, I make phone calls to either people I know, or I make blind phone calls to people in the field. I've asked people on LinkedIn. You yourself can call people in other companies. You can ask connections on LinkedIn. Tell them that you're benchmarking salary for a certain type of job, and ask them if they can give you some guidance. People are unbelievably generous who are active on LinkedIn, so I would tap my LinkedIn network to find that out.
That's very interesting. I actually have not done that myself. Regarding, I guess, if anybody else has a comment, but I think a question that just came up following that thought is, does spending too much time within one organization limit your marketability to other companies? And I know this is an issue that we see with, new career entrants who tend to be, at a job for no longer than 1 or 2 years versus people that have had longer careers, I guess the Gen X and the Boomer population. So would love anyone's thoughts on limiting your marketability by staying at a company for too long.
This is Nancy. There's actually some good research on that topic, particularly from Catalyst. And one of the things that they found, there's a lot of talk about this notion that men are promoted on potential and women are promoted based on experience. And what they found when they ran some research against salary data of women who switched a lot versus men who switched companies at roughly the same rate, was that women actually over time lose money by switching companies, whereas women who stayed at the same company actually made more. And what they attribute that to is this whole idea of women are promoted based on performance versus potential, and so that when every time you go to a new company, you actually end up having to prove yourself again. Whereas unfortunately, men, don't have to do that. That's at least that's what the data says. And there are several studies that I read that talk about that.
But this is Kathy. Can I add to that?
Absolutely.
I find that fascinating data. I think it absolutely depends on how you internalize and think about your experience. So I was at a company for 11 years, and I have to say that I was nervous to leave because I'd grown up there and I was well thought of. I think that it's about how you're stretching. If you are at a place where you're not stretching, you're not growing, you're not expanding your toolbox, I think that's a mistake to stay too long. I think you need to really manage and plan your career as actively as you plan your family life and the education of your children. You've got to plan it. So I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. I think if you're not growing, it's time to figure out how you can, and that may be about leaving.
And Kathy, I totally agree with you. I think we don't manage our lives based on data, but I think that we shouldn't. Some people like the idea of switching in order to capture more economic value, And I think the idea of switching should be exactly what you talked about. Is this a robust career move for me? And can I capture more economic value? Versus, for men, it actually winds up to be an economic plus, regardless.
Yeah. Yes, and let me weigh. This is Vicki. Let me weigh in from the nearing retirement perspective. Capturing market value is something that women don't think about as much as men think about it, and yet the number of women boomers who are now moving into stark poverty, partially as a result of cultural changes that took place during our lives, and partially as a result of the careers that were open to us and those that were closed to us during that period in our lives, but also partially because we're not focused on capturing our market value. So I would say always focus on capturing your market value as well as focusing on career happiness and success.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. I'm going to ask you, there's a lot of questions that are coming in, but one question was just to repeat some of those resources that you had mentioned earlier, Victoria. So the Glassdoor, salary, pay scale, were there any other resources, online resources?
There probably are. These are the three resources I use most often. I have some clients who are recruiters. They do corporate recruiting for a living, which is interesting that they called me to help them negotiate a raise or a new job. But these are also the resources that recruiters are using. So you should know that your employer knows what your market value is. And if you're being paid less than your market value, it should be something that you start with. I would also, when you talk about your value, tell them, use the word benchmarked. It's the term of the trade, and say, I've benchmarked I've benchmarked the compensation for a person in my position, and it is X. And I'd like to have a discussion with you about bringing my compensation up to market. And that, it kind of feels like you're talking in the third person. It doesn't sound like you're being greedy. It's using objective external metrics. And these are all ways to make yourself more comfortable about asking for more for yourself.
There's one more site called thewageproject.org, which is a good one too.
And this is Kathy again. Can I add one more thing? There's data, here we go, love data, that 50% of men negotiate their very first salary in their very first job, and 7% of women do. Let's change that. Let's just change that right this minute. There's thousands of people on this call, and many of them are going to be millennials. Start asking for what you know you deserve.
Or if you know a millennial, tell them.
Yeah.
We all need to be mentors.
Mm-hmm.
So, terrific. Thank you all. So switching over to the best piece of advice you received in your 20s and 30s, if you can share any tips for the millennial, well, I guess the 20-year-old population and the millennial population on this call.
This is Vicki. I got bad advice in my 20s and my 30s because of the age that I am. I got mostly advice that I couldn't do what I said I wanted to do, and that's what motivated me. So I'm going to let the other panelists, hopefully they got good advice in their 20s and 30s.
Well, this is Kathy. Go ahead,
Kathy. No, you can go.
Thank you. I actually just did a video on this. It's called Time to Shine. The advice I got was from a mentor, dear friend of mine who actually died of cancer when I was in my 20s. And you can watch the video, Time to Shine, on my website. But literally this happened. She pulled me over one day, and it was one of her last. And she said, please don't waste it. Don't waste your time. And I remember feeling such a pang of regret, and I didn't even know what it meant or why. And it took me literally, 30 years, 20 years to figure it out. But I really believe that. Don't waste your time. You're going to be working more hours than you probably do anything else. don't waste it. Do something that's meaningful. And it's not all about la, la, la happiness that we're skipping to work every day. It's not about that. It's about finding meaning, finding purpose, really knowing how you want to be of service in the world and working the chops of that so that there's meaning in your life as well as great financial reward.
And this is Nancy. In my 20s and 30s, I think the best piece of advice I got was don't apologize for your strengths. And what I mean by that is, I had gone to a great business school and had come out convinced that I needed to really beef up all those left brain skills, my, analytical skills, my ability to run financial models and figure out, complex strategies, and I got really good at those things. And I was at DoubleClick in the early 2000s, late 90s, and we did a leadership training, and we mapped everybody's brain with this, Herman brain dominance tool, and they mapped everybody in the company from left brain to right brain, and I was the last person mapped, and I was the farthest right brain person in the entire leadership team, way on the other side of the horseshoe. Everybody else was, clustered over in this left brain thing. And number one, I was embarrassed for some ridiculous reason. And number two, everybody was shocked because I had convinced them all that I was so left-brained and analytical. And they all started to laugh, and they were like, where have you been hiding this? And the CEO at the time, Kevin Ryan, said to me, this is an excellent resource we need to draw on. He's like, I've always known that you've been this right brain, by the way. You can't hide it from me. But you need to show this more because this is your strength, and it's awesome that you have been able to develop these other tools. But you are going to go farther on your strength than you are by making up for your weaknesses.
Terrific. Thank you. Just because we have only 6 minutes remaining, I'm going to switch to another question that keeps on coming up, which is about reentering the workforce. And, for women that have taken a step back in their careers to spend more time with kids or, a loved one, how can they expect to rejoin, or can they expect to rejoin at the same level, or do they need to reconcile to play catching up?
This is Kathy, and I know everyone has something to say. This is my belief. No, you can't expect to come in at the same level. I mean, think about, put yourself in the shoes of the hiring manager. They have a certain salary that they want to pay. They want someone who can hit the ground running. They want someone who's been competitive and addressed all of those business challenges that they're facing. And, if you've been out of work for 5 or 7 years, that you're not as competitive. That's just the reality. But I don't want to leave you feeling doom and gloom. There are ways you can address that, and I bet both Nancy and Victoria can talk about that. But I definitely think you have to manage your expectations. And you can get great work. It can happen. But, if you left as a director of finance, making $150 and you're out of work for 7 years, you're not going to get back in at that level. That's my belief. What do the other folks think?
This is Vicki. I spent 25 years hiring. I was always on my law firm's hiring committee. And women who come back into the job market drastically undervalue themselves. If there's something that you actually had to learn, like, how to make an incision before you open somebody's chest to do open heart surgery, and you missed that day, and you need to, learn that before you're you're up to speed with your peers, then you learn that. But I'll tell you that in a lot of occupations, it's not time on the job, and I've hired mothers who have come back. They've accepted ridiculously low salaries. They've generally realized that at some point, like how efficient they are. And some of them, unfortunately, had to leave my law firm to get paid their market value because it's so hard to pull away from an employer's instinct to give only incremental raises. But I've also had these women as consulting clients. The worst thing that women reentering the job market do is to underestimate their market value and to worry too much about having been out of the market. Don't worry about it. Talk about what your market value is based on your education, your training, and experience. And definitely ask for more than you want, because you need to leave room to make concessions in the negotiation process.
This is Nancy. I would definitely support what Victoria says. I would say, first of all, if there's any time in your life when you're going to spend money on a coach, this is the time. If for no other reason, for them to help you have the courage to ask for more, because as Victoria alluded to, it's almost impossible to make up a wage gap once you're inside the company. Your opportunity is once you're entering, number one. Number two, I think, if you're in a profession where there are very significant technical skills involved, like if you're an accountant and the accounting rules have changed significantly over the past 10 years, then you want to get up to speed on those things. But the basic capability of being an accountant hasn't changed. And you want to rely very heavily on references from people who you worked with in the past, who you should keep in touch with, prepare, tell them what you want them to say, so that when people from the new potential job call them, they will say, I have no doubt that she will be your star performer, within 2 months of walking in the job, or as soon as she walks in the door, because I think that's going to go a long way as well. I think, as both Kathy and Victoria alluded to, as we get older, one of the biggest problems is that women are left in poverty as senior citizens, and this is part of the problem. Is that a lot of women take time off, and when we go back, we devalue ourselves actually more than we need to, and the recruiters are incented to get the best deal for the company. They're not incented to be fair. And so your job is to get the best deals for you and your family, not to actually make their job easier.
That's great advice. This is Kathy. I would throw in as well, get very tech savvy. With what social media is. Understand LinkedIn, get on there, make incredible use of this tool. It's fantastic. Get on Twitter, get on Facebook, understand it, because it's a technology-driven world today, and that was not the case 10 years ago. So do yourself a favor and get really comfortable with technology. Would you all
have
agree
your
with
picture
that?
on LinkedIn, please? It really looks like you're out of it if you don't.
Yeah.
So given that we're at time, and I know there were many other questions that came up that we weren't able to address, we encourage all of you to join the discussion and connect. For those of you that aren't part of our Connect community, if you go to linkedin.com/womenconnect, we encourage you to join, and we'll be discussing and answering some of these questions in these conversations. I definitely myself, being a Latina, working in the fintech world and some of the cultural issues that I've faced, I definitely will bring my this question and love to get these experts' thoughts. So I just want to thank Catherine, Kathy, Victoria, and Nancy. Thank you so very much for this inspiring conversation. I don't know if you have one or two last thoughts, but I'll just in terms of closing, before we sign off, if you have any last thoughts that you might want to share.
I have. This is Vicki. I have said leave enough room to make concessions. I'm watching the Makers series on PBS, You Can Only Be What You See. It's incredibly inspiring. Women in space, women in the military, women in Hollywood. I highly recommend it for everyone to give yourself just a little emotional boost about your possibilities and your value.
That's great. This is Kathy. Despite what the research says, whether it's daunting, whether it's encouraging, we're all a sample of one, and it starts with knowing yourself, what matters to you, what is going to bring your life meaning, purpose, and success on your terms. So know that, get to know yourself very well, and just honor that every day.
And I would say, be brave. Be brave for yourself, and be brave for everyone else who you care about. When I started talking about this issue, I did a little math and realized that if we can continue at the same pace, my oldest daughter, who is now 10, will be in her 60s when we achieve pay equity, and in her 80s when we achieve executive suite parity. And I was like, that is not really acceptable to me. And so if we are all just a little bit braver, maybe we can make those things happen faster.
Terrific. Well, thank you all for joining us today. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to be sending the recording and the presentation. You'll be receiving an email, which you can share with those who haven't attended. And we encourage you to fill out the survey as you log out. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.